enable.
Hello and welcome to the Thought League. Today we are going to discuss the potential of an international financial services center and how it can become a gateway to really attract foreign capital into the country. And to discuss just that, we have an eminent panel on CNBC TV 18 with us. Let me welcome on the show Injeti Srinivas, who is the IFSCA chairman, and we have with us Cyril Shroff of Cyril, Amarchand, Mangaldas. Gentlemen, so good to have you on CNBC TV 18. Injeti Srinivas, wanted to start with you on the potential that lies in the IFSCs in the country in terms of attracting FDI. Remember, in the post-COVID era, we have seen the influx already of foreign capital.
Yeah. Nisha, it's a good question. Why this is essential for India? One, that India is one of the largest economies. Now, this large domestic economy of India needs a lot of capital. A lot of global capital flows need to be channelized into India. Notwithstanding the fact that we are one of the highest recipients of FDI, what comes into India at present is a small percentage of what we require. If we want to become a 5 trillion economy and later a 10 trillion economy, you need to attract much more than what you're attracting at present. I'll give you an example. Sovereign funds are very major players nowadays. Take the example of Qatar. The Qatar Sovereign Fund has a total fund size of about 650 billion USD. What they have invested in India till now is less than 1% of the total fund size. So there is a huge potential to be able to attract more investments from sovereign funds, from pension funds, from endowment funds, and also from other pooled funds.
All right. So out of all the points that you mentioned and all positive towards the potential that this particular structure really has, one of the biggest takeaways is capitalizing on new pools of fund, because that's what India is looking at. The private equity players, the sovereign wealth funds who are already here can keep on reinvesting, but we need larger, newer pools. Cyril Shroff, what has been the efficacy of financial services centers across the globe, and how do you see the traction when it comes to the Indian ecosystem?
So financial centers come in various shapes and sizes, right down from the likes of New York, London, Tokyo, into various other types, which on the other end could be entities like Mauritius and Cayman Islands and others, and stuff in between, like Singapore, for example. And every major economy has a financial center. And as Mr. Srinivas said, I think India's time has come. This topic has been under discussion for a long time, and it makes a very big difference. Why does it do so? Firstly, it becomes a gateway for capital. Secondly, it becomes almost like a second engine for growth. It encourages a lot of innovation in the financial markets, and that has a contagion effect. So innovation that might happen in the IFSCA can then be replicated in some form in the rest of India, so to speak. And it becomes a kind of a calibrated approach to even capital account convertibility as well. So there is tremendous potential across various sort of dimensions, not just attracting foreign capital, but also different types of financial products, whether it is commodity exchanges, aircraft leasing, and even more recently, direct listing, because IFSCA and GIFT City are one of the notified exchanges on which direct overseas listing could take place. So it's right at our doorstep. So this is a threshold for tremendous innovation, and India's time has come for all the reasons that Mr. Srinivas mentioned.
All right, Injeti Srinivas, I want to ask one new development also. The geopolitical scenario has really changed in the present times. Are we to capitalize on that factor also and throw some numbers on what is the kind of inflow that we are looking at?
Yeah, I think though we are a late starter, this is the most opportune time for us to, focus on the International Financial Services Center, because, as you mentioned, the geopolitical developments, especially, with the situation emerging in Hong Kong, I think it gives a huge opportunity for India to occupy its rightful place in international finance. We have identified a few focus areas. For example, today you will find many India-centric pooled funds actually residing in places like Luxembourg or Cayman Islands or Mauritius, and they invest in India by setting up a domestic alternative investment fund in India. So there is an extra layer, that means the funds are collected overseas and then they are transmitted to this, pass-through entity which is set up in India, which in turn makes further investment, downstream investment. So one is all the India-centric funds, logically they should be set up in the GIFT IFSC, because it is like a foreign territory.
Yes.
It is like a foreign jurisdiction from FEMA angle, and there is full convertibility here. Whereas in the domestic economy, you don't have full convertibility. Sometimes that becomes a little issue. Also, you have the domestic regulations, which can sometimes pose challenges for a foreign investor to navigate. Here, you will have a regulatory architecture which is aligned to the global financial architecture and, aligned to the best international practices. So we look at a scenario where most of the India-centric funds, there are many of them, will re-domicile to the GIFT IFSC. Second, because of the financial talent here and the low-cost advantage, we also see opportunity in managing global funds, which may not be India-specific. So you could have a situation where the global fund itself is situated in the GIFT IFSC and managed in the GIFT IFSC. Alternatively, you may find a situation where the global fund is residing elsewhere, but it is being managed remotely by a investment manager sitting in GIFT IFSC. So whatever tax regime, regulatory regime, and ease of business requirements are there, those are largely being put in place. So this is one area I wanted to mention. The other area I would like to highlight is lot of international financial service business originating from India is currently transacted in offshore jurisdictions. A case in point is aircraft leasing.
Yes.
We are emerging as the third largest aviation market in the world. And as the third largest aviation market, our acquisition of aircrafts is growing exponentially, and more than 1,000 aircrafts orders have already been placed. Now, these are being procured largely from Ireland, from Dublin, and from other offshore jurisdictions. If this business can come to the GIFT IFSC, it will also then be followed up by the MRO business coming to India. So I think this is another area where we can do a lot.
Right. So it's a very, very nice summarization of all the potential that lies ahead. But Injeti, Srinivas, as well as Cyril, Shroff, hold your thoughts there. We have a lot more to discuss when it comes to also the execution and challenges. So hold your thought. We'll slip into a short breather on the Thought League. It's been established that there is a huge potential in the IFSC development in the country and also in attracting FDI and putting India on the global map. But how easily executable are these ideas, and what could be the challenges and hurdles? We'll discuss that and more when we return after a very short break. Welcome back. You've joined us on the Thought League, and we are discussing the big topic of IFSC development in the country, the potential and also the execution as well as the challenges. Now, before we slipped into the break, Injeti Srinivas, the chairman of IFSCA, was enumerating the kind of potential and the development activities that can be done under this particular umbrella. But Cyril, Shroff, What about the execution? How do you see the regulatory framework as well as the readiness of India to capture this particular promise and the potential that lies ahead?
So just building on what Injeti Srinivas said, I think firstly there's a huge opportunity for the reasons that he mentioned, and there is so much loss of revenue that is taking place. I mean, the estimates are that in 2015 we lost about 50 billion, and if we don't do this, by 2025 it could be over 100 billion. So the opportunity exists, and the way to get it is to create a very robust framework. Now, India has made progress on the regulatory framework. Apart from the SEZ Act, the IFSCA legislation, which is more recent and which has been notified, and he has been appointed chairman, I think is the first major step. Now, this has to be followed by a lot of regulation around three topics: on financial products, on financial services, and financial institutions, and to create an enforcement and a legal framework which will support this. Remember that what you are doing is that you have created actually a regulatory island which is separate from the territory of India in a fictional way. And therefore, it needs a very clear-cut regulatory framework for it to be credible in the global markets, and by which, on the basis of which you can attract foreign capital. So there is a choice of a legal system that has to be made. India generally functions on some kind of a modified common law system from the UK tradition, but we have legislation on something. We have to avoid going to the other extreme of what's called a civil law system, where everything is written in a rule book. So what we will need to evolve is some kind of a specialized common law system, which is largely compatible with the Indian jurisprudence, but is modified specifically for the IFSCA, and that is what will create credibility. It should be enforceable. A contract entered into in the GIFT City or in IFSCA should be enforceable. If enforceability and reliability does not happen, this concept will not take off. So the big challenge now is to evolve the entire framework in a very clear way, keeping in view international benchmarks, but drawing upon the best of Indian traditions.
All right. So that's a very good point made. And in fact, I would take it forward with the IFSCA chairman because, I have spoken to various experts who are looking keenly at this particular space. But while the rest of the country is moving towards like ease of doing business, single window clearance, you have a turf where it is also regulated by the RBI, SEBI, as well as the insurance regulator. So how do you demarcate as far as the regulatory challenges as well as the turf is concerned, and how easy is it for the ecosystem to smoothly function?
Okay, that's a good question, but we'll have to look at IFSC as a separate jurisdiction. Though it's an integral part of India, from the FEMA angle, that is the Foreign Exchange Act angle, it is a separate jurisdiction. So in a way, conceptually, it's like an international jurisdiction. So you have on the one side the domestic regulators, that is RBI, SEBI, IRDA, and PFRDA, which are taking care of the domestic market, the domestic financial market. And on this side of it, you have the IFSCA, which is looking after the international side. So conceptually, there is no sort of overlap of turf.
I have a few questions, and if you can address each one of them briefly, then it will be really great in understanding the overall setup. First, of course, you mentioned it's a global setup, but then the funds which are directly coming via IFSC may be coming under the Indian jurisprudence and Indian law. Do you think the structure needs to change in terms of the layering? Second, when it comes to the RBI's allowance on LRS scheme, there have been many restrictions, and there has also been the net worth restriction. All this also impacts the liquidity and the robustness of this structure. How do you address these problems?
So, you have given two illustrations. So one, I would say that in the alternative investment fund setup, now there is no need, if the fund is set up in IFSC, there is no need to have a domestic AIF as a pass-through entity. this fund which is sitting in the IFSC can directly invest into India, into various companies, subject to whatever FDI, FPI restrictions or norms are existing. So that is one. So it makes things much more simpler. Second, with regard to liberalized remittance scheme, the scheme actually allows every Indian citizen to invest up to $250,000 per annum in permissible current account, capital account transactions. Now, this also has been opened up. That means the IFSC jurisdiction has also been opened up to the resident Indian residents under the current regulations which have been notified by the IFSCA.
Sure.
Yeah, so they can do it. Of course, this point you have said about net worth, this is a conscious decision, Nisha, because you see, you don't want small retail investors to start putting their money here. We would first like to, test this, experiment this with large investors. That means people having 1 million USD net worth or more. And thereafter, we may sort of think of coming down. Making it
so it will be flexible and it will be relaxed later on, like most of the other instruments of investment also that we have seen in the country. But Cyril, Shroff, given the setup that it works in, and with global funds and global companies involved in cross-border transactions, it could be really a breeding ground for many disputes going forward as it becomes larger. What do you have to say about the dispute resolution mechanism and how smoothly can that work?
So there are two parts to it. First, let me address the legal system part and then the disputes part. So just to build on what Injeti said, I think first there has to be clarity that this is a separate regime.
Yes.
So the key thing is that the IFSCA legislation applies the IFSCA, allows the IFSCA authority to disapply many laws in the country, including many of the provisions, say like FEMA or the SEBI Act and others, and to create an island of sort of regulatory sort of possibilities. And that is what they are going to do. So that, I think, reduces the possibility of conflict of laws, because otherwise you will have overlapping regimes and something will fall through between the cracks, or you will have double compliance. So that is going to be one major area of legal conflict which will get sorted because of the way this has been envisaged. Now, the second topic on dispute resolution. So enforceability of contracts is going to be extremely important, because many of the financial and corporate relationships are going to be based on contracts. And the international community invests on the basis of enforceability of contracts. So you have two choices. Either you create a special legal system within IFSCA and a special court system, or you rely upon the courts of India. And that problem has yet to be resolved. But in any event, whichever court system applies this, will have to apply these special laws. And this is what we are seeing in other financial centers as well. The second part is of private dispute resolution, which is arbitration. So one of the big developments that will have to take place is to create an arbitration, a very enforceable, strong and efficient arbitration system for disputes between private parties who are functioning in IFSCA. So there could be disputes between a party and the IFSCA authorities, or between somebody in the rest of India, and then disputes between two parties within IFSCA. And arbitration is going to be a big part of the answer.
All right. So many legal tangles also expected, as is the case with any new structure and new setup that comes in vogue. But Injeti, Srinivas, how will you dispel the perception of these mechanisms being used as for round tripping of funds or for black money entry into the country?
So there are very well set out mechanisms, both domestically and internationally. So within the domestic context, we have this PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. It has very strong KYC requirements where, the identity of the person, transacting, the source of money. There are mechanisms to keep a tab on all of that. More importantly, because these are cross-border transactions, you have what is known as the Financial Action Task Force. This framework is there, and they have certain compliance requirements from all jurisdictions. and we necessarily have to comply with those requirements to be, a credible financial jurisdiction. Apart from that, technology can play a very important role. Today, artificial intelligence, data analytics, all this can come to your support. So we are in the process of developing very strong supervisory technology and regulatory technology frameworks, which can support us and counter any such wrongful activities.
Right.
Most importantly, we also are trying to have bilateral networking with major jurisdictions. And so all this put together will give us the requisite capacity to deal with this. And on perception, I think India has a high reputation on these matters. And since we are, we are ultimately an Indian entity, I think there are no perception issues at the moment.
Interface with your various clients, the companies and the global investors. What is the perception that is building and how soon can this take off?
I think there's very high level of interest in this concept. Its time has come. It is very, very sort of carefully looked at internationally as well. I think in terms of the global ratings of such financial centers, India is right on the top in terms of the interest levels. There is a lot of opportunity for financial innovation, whether it is fintech or whether it is in terms of more digital banking or for the various products that we spoke about, like aircraft leasing or commodity exchange, like gold exchange, for example. So there are many streams which will converge into this. Direct listing will be another one. So my own sort of prediction is that this is going to be very successful. It is more important, however, to get it right in terms of the legal and policy framework and the infrastructure that we create. So I think the right approach to this would be to make haste slowly, rather than to rush into too many things and then something goes wrong, but to rather do it very systematically. And we couldn't have had a better leader for making this happen. So I'm very positive, and I think this is one of the great new ideas for India's future.
All right, on that positive note, I must thank both you gentlemen, Cyril Shroff as well as Injeti Srinivas, for joining us right here on the Thought League on CNBC TV 18. So that was quite a riveting discussion, and given the fact that the COVID-19 post-era has really eliminated most of the boundaries, the time could be opportune for setups like IFSCA to capitalize and put India in that global map. With that, it's a wrap on the Thought League. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.